So here's a snapshot of what happened. Republicans said that fixing the border was their top priority. They appointed a hardline conservative, my friend, Senator James Lankford, to come up with a bipartisan bill to fix the border. They said if Lankford can get the deal, they'd support it. We got that deal. If it passed, it would have been the toughest border security bill in our lifetime. Arguably, it would have been the toughest border security bill ever. $20 billion for border security, more detention beds, more patrol officers, more asylum officers, more equipment to intercept fentanyl, a new power for the president to close parts of the border when crossings get too high, an end to the era in which an asylum applicant could spend 10 years in the country before their application was heard. It was tough. It would have helped to fix the border. It was a compromise. Get this, it was supported by the conservative pro-Trump Border Patrol Union and the left-leaning Association of Immigration Attorneys. The Washington Post was for it, and the Wall Street Journal was for it. It was a true compromise. But within hours of the bill's release, Republicans killed it. When it came to the floor, only 4 Republicans voted for the bill they asked for. It has now been 22 days since Republicans killed the toughest border security bill of our lifetime, a bipartisan bill that would have helped us control the border. Why did Republicans do this? Because Republicans do not want to fix the border. Secret's out. For Republicans, the border is a money-making grievance machine. And if we passed our border bill and fixed the problem, Republicans literally wouldn't know what to do with their days. Fox would lose ratings, Republican senators would lose clicks and donors, Donald Trump would lose an issue to campaign on. What would some of my Republican Senate colleagues do with their weekends if they couldn't go down to the border and dress up as Border Patrol officers and scream about fake outrage? If the border bill passed, if the border was under control, Republicans might have to get hobbies. If the bipartisan bill to control our border had passed, our border would be more orderly, our immigration system would be vastly improved, America would be better off and more secure. But yes, Republicans would lose their money-making grievance machine, the broken border. That's what happened. Republicans killed the toughest bipartisan border bill that they have ever seen because they don't want to fix the border. They want to keep it a mess because they think it helps them politically. 22 days since Republicans killed the toughest bipartisan border security bill in over a decade. You know who does want to fix the border? President Joe Biden, Democrats in Congress. Joe Biden asked for those additional resources to hire more Border Patrol agents, to build more detention capacity, to install more technology at the border to interrupt the fentanyl trade. Joe Biden helped write the bipartisan border bill, which gave him those new powers I talked about. And today, Joe Biden is going to be at the border to talk about his agenda to put border security first, but also to make other badly needed changes to our immigration system, like improving our asylum system and getting a pathway to citizenship for people who've been living in the shadows of our society for far too long. Donald Trump is going to be at the border today, too, but for a different reason. Donald Trump does not see the border as a problem that needs to be fixed. Donald Trump sees the border as a problem to be exploited. He openly brags about instructing his followers here in the United States Senate to kill the bipartisan border bill because its passage would have been good for Joe Biden and the country. For Joe Biden, the border is a serious issue that he wants to fix. He has a plan to do it. For Donald Trump and the Republicans, the border is just a money-making grievance machine that they refuse to solve. The problem is, nothing can pass in Washington without Republican support. I know there are Republicans who voted for the bipartisan bill, only 4, but the rule is that Republicans refuse to support more resources, more patrol officers, more detention beds, and the rule is that they will vote against any bipartisan legislation to make the border more secure. So, 22 days since Republicans killed the toughest border security bill during our time in the Senate, and unfortunately the border is going to remain unresolved so long as Republicans don't want to solve it. I yield the floor. Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we don't have to fight over everything here. It's okay if occasionally we find consensus around common sense things that we could do together to keep our country safe. I kind of thought we had consensus on at least the idea that civilians shouldn't be able to get their hands on machine guns. I understand there's differences between Republicans and Democrats on AR-15s, that maybe not all of my Republican colleagues think that everybody should go through a background check before they buy a gun, but I thought we were all in agreement that fully automatic weapons were too dangerous to be in the hands of civilians, that these are unquestionably weapons of war. They are designed for mass slaughter, and you just do not need a weapon that allows you to fire hundreds of rounds per minute in order to hunt, in order to protect your home, in order to shoot for sport. But apparently, Mr. President, we do not have consensus on the question of whether Americans should have access to machine gun technology. Because earlier today, Senator Heinrich, a gun owner, somebody that knows a lot about weapons, came to the floor to ask for consent that we make sure that civilians can't get their hands on a device called a bump stock that allows you to convert a semi-automatic weapon into a machine gun. That's effectively what a bump stock does. It allows you to change a semi-automatic weapon, in which you have to pull the trigger in order to fire each round, into an automatic weapon in which one physical pull of the finger allows you to fire multiple rounds. It effectively gives you access to an automatic weapon. I thought that we all agreed that automatic weapons, machine guns, should be in the hands of the military. I especially thought we all agreed on that after what happened in Las Vegas. On October 1st, 2017, a gunman opened fire on a concert from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. There were 500 yards between that gunman on the 32nd floor and those innocent concert goers. That gunman fired about 1,100 rounds, killing 58 people, and wounding 500. When we think about the Las Vegas tragedy, we focus on that number, 58 people. That's a stunning number of people to die in an instant. We don't talk about the 500 people who were injured, many of them with injuries that changed their lives forever. Everyone, whether they were injured or not, dealing with trauma that impacted their lives forever. 1,100 rounds fired from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. You know how long it took him to get off 1,100 rounds? 11 minutes. 11 minutes. That gunman was able to fire around 90 shots every 10 seconds. Why? Because he had taken a bump stock and converted a semi-automatic weapon, turning it effectively into an automatic weapon. Even Donald Trump, the biggest backer of the NRA and the gun lobby that has ever been in the White House, knew that something had to change. He put forward a regulation to ban bump stocks, and most of my Republican colleagues celebrated that change. I don't remember many of them opposing it. But this month, the Supreme Court, packed with pro-gun lobby justices, most of which selected by Donald Trump, ruled that that regulation was unconstitutional. I think they got it wrong. I think they absolutely got it wrong. I think if you look at the plain reading of the statute, bump stocks are illegal. And the regulation proffered by the Trump administration should have been ruled as constitutional. But Trump's appointees thought otherwise. They bought the argument of the gun lobby, and they ruled that bump stocks could once again be sold commercially in this country. And so we thought that it'd be an easy case to make to our colleagues that, having seen the regulation proffered by the Trump administration be ruled unconstitutional, having been offered by the Supreme Court the chance to fix that statutorily, that we could get to that business this week, but we are not, because Republicans objected to our efforts to try to pass into law a ban on bump stocks, to try to take away from psychopaths and madmen the technology that allows them to turn an automatic weapon on crowds of concertgoers and get off 1,000 plus rounds in a 10-minute period of time. What Republicans in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives are doing on a regular basis is facilitating the mass slaughter of Americans, handing to individuals whose brains are breaking the tools of mass slaughter, refusing to do the easy, popular, common sense things to just make it a little bit harder for 58 people to be gunned down, 500 people to be injured in a 10-minute period of time. No law that we pass will end gun homicides in this country. No law that we pass will completely eliminate mass shootings. But there simply are technologies like the bump stock that turn a mass shooting in which 5 or 10 people might have died into a 58-person slaughter. It is just true that when you have a weapon like an AR-15 or you have a converted semi-automatic weapon with a bump stock, that the slaughter is worse, that more people die. Why on earth would we choose to hand to these killers weapons that are designed for one purpose and one purpose only: mass slaughter? You do not need a bump stock in order to protect your home. You do not need a machine gun in order to hunt for sport. The only reason you need a bump stock is to engage in mass murder. I take this personally because I have lived through an experience of mass slaughter, as has the presiding officer. I did not lose a loved one. but I've come to know those families from Sandy Hook like they are family. And I know there is never, ever getting over losing a loved one. Frankly, whether it be to a gun death by suicide or by mass slaughter. But it makes it harder to deal with the loss of a loved one in a mass killing when you know the people that you elect to positions of high office had the power to prevent the slaughter, or at least prevent it from being as bad as it was, and they chose to do nothing. Now, Republicans complain that this was a political stunt. What about everything that Joe Biden has said and done? What about the efforts that Senate Democrats have undertaken would suggest that we aren't sincere in our desire to prevent unnecessary gun deaths? We have over and over again acted in good faith to try to find bipartisan compromise around changing the gun laws of this nation. Joe Biden has shown absolute sincerity in his desire to try to keep more people alive. This is not a gotcha unanimous consent request. This is a real attempt to effectuate what we thought was a consensus, that people shouldn't have access to machine gun technology in this country. Senate Republicans could have agreed to work with us. They could make an offer today to expedite consideration of this bill next week. And so the only political decision that is being made here is by Republicans who are opposing a bill that is undoubtedly supported by the mass majority of Americans. So if this wasn't the way that Republicans wanted to do this, then I'm open to other offers. Because we have passed bipartisan legislation to save lives. There are Republicans who have joined us, most recently on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And what we know is that when we do come together and pass laws that make it harder for dangerous people to get their hands on dangerous weapons, we save lives. Urban gun deaths are down by 20% in this country. From 2022 to 2023, we saw the sharpest decline in gun murders in the history of this country. In 2024, mass shootings are down around 30% compared to the same time period in 2023. We are seeing a precipitous decline in gun violence in this country, whether it be urban homicides or mass shootings. And I'm not suggesting that the entire reason for that is the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, but you better believe that's a big part of the reason. You better believe that when we pass laws that make it harder for dangerous people to get their hands on dangerous weapons, that we save lives. And what matters in this country more than protecting the physical safety of your loved ones? What matters more? Nothing. Think about it. You would give anything to protect your son or daughter from physical harm. You would trade away your career, your savings. You might even give up your own life. And we have an easy opportunity. We had an easy opportunity. Republicans had an easy opportunity earlier today to just make it a little bit harder for this small subset of individuals in this country whose brains have collapsed and believe that the only way to deal with their demons is to turn a gun on others. We had a chance to make it less likely that that subset of individuals would be able to kill 58 people, like what happened in Las Vegas. And we couldn't even come to that consensus. We're open for business. If this wasn't the way today, show us the way. Tell us how we can answer Republican concerns so that we can get these weapons of war, these facilitators of mass murder, these bump stocks off the streets. I yield the floor.
Across our country, more than 3 million female high school and college athletes compete, practice, and train every day to achieve athletic success. For many of these young women and girls, their sports are more than just a game. They're a lifelong passion that improves their physical health, boosts self-confidence, and teaches them the leadership skills to succeed on and off the field. In short, women's athletics have done incredible things for women, which is why it is so deeply disturbing to see the Biden-Harris administration wage a war on women's sports. In their crosshairs, Title IX, the landmark civil rights law that codified protections on the basis of sex. By requiring equal resources for training, recruitment, and scholarships for female athletic programs. Title IX led to an explosion of women's participation in sports. In fact, since 1972, the year Title IX became law, the number of female college athletes increased by a factor of 7, while the number of female high school athletes has increased by more than 10-fold. Yet for years, we have seen this administration undermine the very Title IX protections that enabled greater women's participation in sports. In 2022, on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, the Department of Education announced new rules that force schools to allow biological males to play on female teams. And just in April, the administration redefined discrimination to allow biological men to use women-only locker rooms and bathrooms. Are Tennesseans and the American people really expected to believe this is okay? You do not need to be a biologist to understand that there are fundamental biological differences between men and women. And when it comes to sports, these differences undermine fair play, erase women's hard-earned achievements, and put female athletes in danger. Thankfully, many young women are bravely speaking out against the Biden-Harris administration's radical agenda, including Tennessee's Riley Gaines. In 2021, Riley was forced to compete against and share a locker room with a biological male during the NCAA Women's Swimming and Diving Championships. During the 200-meter competition, Riley tied for 5th with her male competitor, but when Riley went to the awards ceremony to pick up her trophy, officials told her that they were giving the 5th-place trophy to the biological male. "Yours will be coming in the mail," they told her. This should never happen in the United States. Now more than ever, Congress should stand with the female athletes fighting for fair play and celebrate the incredible contributions women have made in the world of sports. That's why I'm calling for unanimous consent for my resolution to establish October 10th as American Girls in Sports Day. Of course, we picked that date for a special reason. As the 10th day of the 10th month, October 10th is represented by the Roman numerals XX, the same numerals of the female sex chromosome. In the last 50 years, female athletes have gone from the sidelines to the center stage of competition. As we continue to fight for women's participation in sports, we must keep in mind what is at stake. And the American Girls in Sports Day resolution will help to ensure that we all join together and celebrate our female athletes. I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation be discharged from further consideration, and the Senate now proceed to Senate Resolution 669. Further, that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Objection. Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. First of all, let me offer my thanks to the senator from Tennessee for all the work that she has done with my colleague, Senator Blumenthal, to protect our kids online. I'm truly grateful for what they have done together. And although she and I have not worked closely together on legislation, I hope that we'll be able to find partnerships to work together to further protections from our kids, for our kids. And I mean that sincerely. She and I may not agree on a lot. As she will hear, we don't agree on this particular resolution, but I do hope that we get the chance to work together. I mean that, but I also mean this, with all due respect. Let's be clear about what this is, Mr. President. This isn't an effort to solve a problem. This whole obsession with transgender kids from the right wing is just about picking on vulnerable kids so that adults can make themselves feel big. Bullying and harassing kids because it makes adults feel powerful. As far as I'm concerned, this whole effort is shameful. It's important to understand that resolutions like this do not stand in isolation. It is part of a massive campaign by the right to convince Americans that they should fear immigrants, that they should fear Muslims, that they should fear gay children, that they should fear transgender athletes. The world in which Republicans want us to live is a world where the biggest problems are not low wages or expensive health care or addiction or loneliness, but the threats posed to us by people who are of a different race or speak a different language or are of a different sexual orientation or gender identity. It's a massive, coordinated attempt to marginalize people who aren't white, straight, and Christian. And it exists for a reason, to distract you. I have a ton of close Republican friends in this chamber who I work with a lot, but let's be honest. The Republican Party's platform today is maybe the most unpopular agenda of any major political party in recent memory. Ban abortion, cut taxes for corporations and millionaires, ban books, loosen gun laws. Nobody wants any of that. So what do you do if the things you actually want to do, if you achieve power, are super, super unpopular? You distract them with giant, gross lies, like immigrants are eating our pets, or greatly exaggerated untruths, like our high school sports are under assault from transgender kids. It is all an effort to hide the ball from the real agenda, abortion bans and millionaire tax cuts, by trying to make you believe that you should spend your entire day, that you should spend your entire life just being afraid of people that are different from you. Let me give you the facts, not the fear-mongering, about high school transgender athletes. And I'll let you decide whether this situation is worthy of hundreds of bills having been introduced by Republicans all across the country, whether it's worthy of debate continuously over and over again on the Senate floor. There are over 6 million kids competing in high school sports today. For the problem of transgender girls competing in girls' sports to be a national crisis, what percentage of that 6 million would be transgender girls? 10%? Is that a crisis? 5%? 1%? It's none of those. Let's take Florida as an example. More than 800,000 students in Florida participate in high school athletics. Before they enacted their ban, How many transgender athletes were in Florida of those 800,000 students? 100? Nope. 50? Nope. Over the course of 8 years, in the entire state of Florida, before their ban, there were 13 transgender high school athletes. 13. Those 13 girls were apparently waging a war against girls' sports. That's a pretty small army to be waging a war. You're more likely to be killed by a falling object in this country than to have your daughter compete against a transgender girl in high school sports. But what if she did? I think every state and every school district should decide these questions for themselves. I don't think the federal government should get involved. But as a parent personally, I celebrate those few transgender kids who often spend their entire adolescence being shamed or marginalized by the kind of small people who push resolutions like this. I celebrate the fact that they get the experience of the camaraderie and the happiness that comes with being part of a sports team. I think that's great. I don't think that's a threat to my kids. I don't think that's a threat to my community or the nation. I teach my kids to love everybody, to include everybody, to see people who are different from them, who are a different race, a different religion, even a different gender identity as potential friends, not as enemies, waging war against them, to be shamed or bullied. This is an absurd resolution. It's designed to distract Americans from Republicans' real agenda. It's designed to build a culture of fear and mistrust, a culture that I'm going to tell you, most Americans reject, and therefore I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would encourage my colleague to go read the Republican Party platform. It's very short, as a matter of fact. And there's nothing in it about banning anything. Believe you me, I know that. So I would encourage him to take the 15 or 20 minutes. It's not a long, lengthy document. It's got 20 actions that we are going to take, and then it has some principles on which we stand and believe. I also find it very interesting that he looks at a resolution that would celebrate women as something that should be feared, because it's not about fear. It's not about division. It's not about distraction. This is something that says to our young girls and these young athletes, we are proud of you. Keep it up. I mean, here's some of the language from the resolution. Athletic participation has an important positive impact on young girls, improving their physical health, self-confidence, their discipline. Women have been responsible for some of the greatest athletic feats in the sports history of the United States, from the Olympic Games, and we all cheered our young women who excelled and won those medals, and those that were in competition in the Olympics, all the way to professional competition. Female athletes have served as an inspiration for generations of women and girls. In Tennessee, I will tell you, there are young girls probably out in the driveway bouncing a basketball right now. They want to be a Lady Vol. That is one of their goals in life. And as for the number of titles and things that have been lost since 2003, biological men have displaced women and girls from over 950 championship titles, medals, scholarships, and records that should have rightfully gone to these girls. And at least 28 women's sports titles in volleyball, swimming, mountain biking, track and field, weightlifting, and cycling. Now, this is a celebration of female accomplishment. This is a celebration of female accomplishment. So while I enjoy the opportunity to work with my colleague, I am disappointed to hear him feel and express his opinion that celebrating women and giving a day to celebrate our female athletes would be something that would strike fear and would cause division, we should all be united around celebrating our female athletes. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, last week in both the House and Senate, legislation was introduced to increase the Secret Service protection for presidential and vice presidential nominees. We all know why this legislation is needed. In the span of just 65 days, President Trump, our former president and the Republican nominee to be the next president of the United States, has been the target of 2 assassination attempts. In Butler, Pennsylvania, President Trump was shot in the head, but miraculously was spared from death. Unfortunately, Fire Chief Corey Comparatori was killed by the assassin's bullets, and others were gravely injured by his gunfire. It didn't happen again in my home state of Florida. It is thanks to the incredible work of President Trump's Secret Service detail that another would-be assassin was unable to take a shot at the president while he was golfing with friends. We know that day could have ended much differently. We thank God that these attempts have not been successful. But each of these events have reminded the nation of the dangers surrounding President Trump and the need to make sure he, his family, and those around him are safe. That's why I introduced the Protect Our Presidents Act here in the Senate, and Representative Mike Lawler and Richie Torres introduced the Enhanced Presidential Security Act in the House. The safety and security of those seeking to lead our nation should never be in jeopardy and should be applied regardless of party. That's why these bills ensure all presidential nominees, both now and in the future, are provided the enhanced protection they clearly require and deserve. On Friday, the House passed Representatives Lawler and Torres' bill in a unanimous vote of 405 to 0. This unanimous vote shows that when common sense and desperately needed legislation comes before Congress, we can act quickly to do what the American people expect of us. I am proud to lead this effort in the Senate. I'm on the floor today to request the immediate passage of the Enhanced Presidential Security Act so we can send this good and necessary bill to President Biden's desk so it may become law. Mr. President, our action today goes beyond the simple language of this bill to increase the Secret Service protection for our party's presidential and vice presidential nominees. Passing the Enhanced Presidential Security Act today with the unanimous consent of the Senate sends an important message to the American public and the world that we will not ignore these threats, which are truly an attack on our democratic process and have rightly shocked the world. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 9106, which was received by the House and is at the desk.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 9106, an act to direct the Director of the United States Secret Service to apply the same standards for determining the number of agents required to protect presidents, vice presidents, and major presidential and vice presidential candidates, and for other purposes.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure?
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reserving the right to object, let me make it clear that I share Senator Scott's concern, deep concern, that the recent attacks on former President Trump's life have made it clear that there are security gaps in his protection. What happened in Butler and Palm Beach was unacceptable, and it cannot be allowed to happen again. That's why this week Congress is coming together, poised to pass a continuing resolution that I hope the Senator will support, that will give the Secret Service $231 million in additional funding to provide the agency with the authority to spend money at a faster rate so that they can meet their mission, and their mission is zero fail. I'm the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, which is charged with funding the Secret Service, and I'm proud of the quick work that we have done to identify the funds that can be spent between now and the election and between now and the inauguration to make sure that any gaps are closed. The reason that I rise on this particular bill, though, is because I don't want to promise the American public more than this bill actually delivers. This bill says that the Secret Service shall use the same standards for determining the number of agents required to protect presidents, vice presidents, and major presidential and vice presidential candidates. Now, that may sound meaningful, but in reality, my sense is that that is current law. Right now, when the Secret Service makes a determination on the provision of protection, it is assessing the protectee's life, their work, their travel patterns, the potential threats, and the risk of harm to that person. The standard that the Secret Service uses is to provide whatever protection level is necessary to meet that zero-fail mission, to protect the person under their charge. With a team of experts, the Secret Service determines the level and the type of protection that is needed. That's the process, and those are the existing standards. And let's be clear, commanders-in-chief, presidents of the United States, do have certain unique requirements regarding their protection. For instance, the Department of Defense is supplying a traveling commander-in-chief with certain capabilities, chiefly amongst them the ability to stay in contact with our nuclear triad and communication assets necessary for the president to be in seamless communication with the Department of Defense and military command should a crisis arise. That is a unique set of capabilities that a commander-in-chief has, and it goes into the assessment that the Secret Service makes as to the level of protection that the commander-in-chief needs. They are using the same standard, do whatever is necessary in order to protect the life of the protectee, but commanders-in-chief, because they are commanders-in-chief, have a different constellation of assets that surround them that mean that the standard gets applied accordingly. I'm not actually going to object. I'm not sure that this bill changes anything about the way that the Secret Service approaches their mission. They are going to continue to do whatever is necessary in order to protect the detailee, to protect the individual under their mandate. And I think the much more substantive thing we are going to do this week is to get them the resources that they need. And my hope is that all of my Republican colleagues who have been talking about the importance of Secret Service protection are willing to support this increase in funding that the continuing resolution will include. But I would end by expressing my additional hope that we will seek to have a more holistic conversation here about how to protect former President Trump, how to protect President Biden, how to protect Vice President Harris. I'm ready to move forward with this bill. I don't think it does anything to meaningfully change the way that the Secret Service approaches their job. I'm ready to move forward on additional assets. But we also continue to choose to give weapons of mass destruction to assassins. Other nations around the world don't choose to hand weapons with such accurate long-range capabilities, such powerful destructive force to these assassins whose brains are breaking. We also have a constellation of actors in this country that are engaged in a web of conspiracy theories. There's a justification of political violence that exists in this country today. Apologies for those people that tried to kill us, attacked us on January 6th, that leads many others to contemplate that they will also be let off the hook for their acts of political violence. And so I take the protection of former President Trump and Vice President Harris and everyone under Secret Service protection very seriously. Let's move ahead with this bill. I don't think it actually solves the problem. Let's pass the additional money so that they have everything they need, the Secret Service, in order to get the job done. And then let's sit down and have a broader conversation about why we have seen this spike in political violence and what other ways Republicans and Democrats can come together. Only by having that comprehensive conversation about funding, about the lethal means of assassination, about the celebration of political violence that happens in this country will we really do the job that is necessary and help the Secret Service reach their zero-fail mission. With that, I yield the floor.
Is there objection to proceeding? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I further ask that the bill be considered, read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleagues for their support of this common sense legislation, which has now passed with unanimous bipartisan support in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. I will continue working with my colleagues to ensure our nominees for President and Vice President are never in jeopardy and are provided the enhanced protection they clearly require and deserve. This bill will now go to President Biden's desk, and I hope he acts quickly to sign it into law. Thank you, Mr. President.